I've been trying to record this intro for like 5 minutes now, but zombies keep showing up to fight me, and it's like, this is a pagoda. Oh, great, it's daytime. This is a build based off a pagoda, specifically the Horyuji Pagoda. The Horyuji Pagoda is one of the oldest wooden structures in the world. Now, this is not to scale. The actual pagoda, from base to the bottom of the spire, is about 32.5 meters tall, and this is shorter than that. See, I was invited to be on a building SMP, which means I had to have a really good plan for what to build for this whole thing. So I chose to build in the architectural style of the Muromachi period and a little bit of the Momoyama period of Japan. Why did I choose to do that? I just think it's neat. I think the buildings are really pretty, and I think you should leave me alone. But you see, pagodas, in my opinion, are one of the most interesting buildings to come out of Japan because they didn't come just from Japan. They came from a variety of sources because of history. Hold on, let me give you a second. Just to clarify, this all started with some guy named Buddha, right? The Buddha was born as Siddhartha Gautama as a prince to an Indian empire. He was raised pampered and sheltered, but then he eventually found out about the horrors of the world like death and sickness and poor people. So he abandoned his family, his child, his wife, and he went on to search for enlightenment, to figure out what life was truly about, and he invented his own philosophy and teachings and started to teach that to everyone around him. Now, he did reunite with his son, but that it does kind of suck that he left for a long time. But because he was just a highly respected teacher when he died, the people wanted to respect the fact that he was really great while he was alive. Now, everyone here is probably familiar with the idea of a tomb, but the Buddhists didn't use tombs in the way that we do. They instead had a type of grave known as a reliquary. Reliquaries were they specifically put items that were important to the person that died into an area and then bury that. So what they did is they took the Buddha's personal items, which he didn't have a lot of because he reached enlightenment. They put it at the bottom of a big hole and they filled that big hole with rocks until eventually it made a big dome. Now this is the Indian stupa. Now Buddha was actually had his relics put in around like 7 different stupas, and then those actually moved around a bit. Now one of the ones that actually does still hold it isn't one of the original 7 stupas. It's called the Great Stupa at Sanchi. But the idea of the stupa would transfer. Things became more like, oh guys, we got to make our thing look the coolest. Moved to places like Tibet and the Himalayas. And Tibet changes how the stupa looks. Now remember, the travel of Buddhism takes over a couple hundred years, and so the things that changed gradually. Like originally Tibetan stupas kept the big dome, but they made the spire on top like really big, and they had these big bases. So the dome started becoming a bit more like oblong. The bases were still huge. The spires were massive, and also they started putting eyeballs on it, which we're not going to. But eventually this would lead to China. China started evolving their stupas into something known as pagodas, and now these actually started off pretty square. If you look at some famous Chinese pagodas, one of my favorite ones is actually, I think, octagonal. It's a very nice looking building, but it is not square, and it is not the one that's going to carry on throughout the rest of the talk that we're going to have, because they do stay relatively square in Korea and Japan. And this is a lopsided building like crazy, but we're going to work with it. And this is actually the one that was going to travel through Korea. And the crazy thing is, a lot of people like to skim over Korean pagodas. They're really nice to look at. But the Korean pagoda is the one that influences Japanese pagodas because Buddhism traveled from India through China through Korea through Japan. It's just weird that like the couple of textbooks that I read just kind of leave it out. I don't know, man. It feels kind of integral. In the Japanese pagoda, we start seeing a culmination of a lot of things of all of the previous iterations of the stupa. There's a wide base with a staircase as people start going up, and it leads into a thin square building where the only thing that you can actually interact with is this board. Now some buildings do have a staircase to go through the middle, but most of the time it is just a large metal pillar that goes at the center for stability. From these buildings we have these huge roofs that we see from China and Korea. They take up a lot of area, and they're actually roughly as big as the base. These roofs are supported by these huge supports that go up into it to keep up the weight of how wide it is. All of the rest of these floors are decoration for honoring whatever is inside it. So these upper floors get shorter, and they actually do get a little bit thinner for balance reasons because the building is so tall. Now Japan is a big fan of 5-story pagodas. The roofs also get smaller, just to mention. They also have these big intricate fence works going around. I realize I'm discussing this in a lot more detail than I did the other ones. They also have like faux windows sometimes, and I think that's funny. Now you would find often inside of these pagodas statues of the Buddha, little relics. These were just basically spots to pray, worship. There's a thing called circumambulation where they would circle around the main central pillar with all the statues around it inside to show their praise, to show their devotion to Buddhism, you know. And then once you get to the 5th floor, they would have these big pointy roofs, and they would have these huge spires. These things are architectural achievements. They're so sick to realize that these things exist in real life, entirely out of wood, standing up for so long. Remember, Japan is an earthquake zone. These things stand up to earthquakes due to how structurally sound they are. The innovations created to construct these pagodas all the way back then are in use today to make sure our skyscrapers are sound. Now, the weak among you might be asking, why didn't you just look at some cool pictures of Japanese buildings and call it a day instead of doing all this architectural history studying? And that's because because you're late. Art history is awesome, and I talk about it pretty regularly on stream. I have a whole playlist of it. It's becoming a problem, I'm gonna be quite honest. I do have to emphasize, I don't want to give off the wrong vibe. This isn't a weeb thing. I'm not going, oh my god guys, think Japan. I have other architecture that I like that is not from Japan. I cannot be associated with weeaboos. That would be so damaging for me.